Welcome back to This Week. I'm pleased to be joined by Glenn Funk. He is Nashville's District Attorney General. Always nice to see you, sir.
Good to be here, Bob.
You are working on a couple of pieces of legislation with Republicans, which is really nice. We got some bipartisan work going on, important pieces of legislation that might actually save some lives. If approved, this legislation would, in effect, has the potential to keep people with mental health issues, those people found incompetent to stand trial, from possessing weapons. We'll talk about the bill itself, the difference between mental health issues and incompetence to stand trial.
Right. Well, first of all, mental health issues have bipartisan support. This is one of those topics that both Democrats and Republicans can work together on to provide proper supports for folks that have mental health issues, while at the same time working to make sure that our community is safe. So it's one important distinction is, well, what if you have a mental illness? You know, what if you're not guilty by reason of insanity versus what is this competency issue? And those are separate issues. If someone is found not guilty by reason of insanity, it means that they had such a mental health illness that they didn't understand that what they were doing was wrong or didn't understand what they were doing. And if that happens, then the person is found not guilty by reason of insanity, but they are then turned over to a mental hospital and they stay there until the mental health professionals decide that it's appropriate for them to be discharged, which could be months, could be years. It also never comes off of your criminal record or your medical record, to where if you present in crisis some other time, then people already know, hey, we've had this other issue with this person before. Competency is different. Competency is, I don't understand the criminal justice process. I cannot help with my defense because I don't know what my defense attorney does. I don't understand what the prosecutor does. I don't understand what the judge does, how this is going to happen in a trial, or what could happen to me afterwards. A lot of those folks are folks that have had a cognitive delay since birth. Some of them have had a traumatic brain injury. Some of those, though, are people who have mental health issues that prevent them from understanding the process. Maybe they understood what they were doing at the time, but they cannot understand the process and cannot be prosecuted according to the Supreme Court, because if you cannot help with your defense, then it's not fair for us to prosecute those folks. And so that's something that the United States Supreme Court ruled on decades ago, and that causes real problems.
This legislation deals with people deemed incompetent to stand trial. A judge would make that decision, and if that person is deemed this, he could not possess a weapon, and he would be in the care of a mental health facility until and if he becomes competent to stand trial. Is that correct?
Right. So we've got two major pieces of legislation that are working their way through. The legislation that you just referenced deals with the folks that have committed serious felonies, violent crimes, people that we know are violent, but the doctors have said they are incompetent to stand trial, and so a judge has her hands tied to where she can't allow a prosecution to go forward. What this proposes to do is to treat this like a not guilty by reason of insanity. The short explanation is, if you are found incompetent to stand trial and it is a violent crime, then they would then be an involuntary committal would happen, and the person would be put into the support system that deals with folks that have this type of cognitive issue or this type of mental health issue, until the doctors say this person can now be released and would be safe within the community.
How is this different than red flag laws, which the Republican lawmakers, the governor, and others opposed? This they're considering because, I guess, of the determination that a doctor is involved. What's the difference?
Well, we first have to deal with making sure that the person can be released into the community again, and that they've got the supports to be able to be successful. The second part of this legislation, which is also important, is to make sure that folks who have already had a judicial determination that they are incompetent, validated by the doctors that have reported to the courts, cannot possess weapons. It's already the law that if you're a convicted felon, you cannot possess a weapon. And so this essentially mirrors that restriction on our Second Amendment rights.
And a companion piece, you're also looking at misdemeanor offenders who, if they are found incompetent, they're not just turned loose, but there's a process that this law would take care of.
Right. Well, there's another piece of legislation that's separate, that's going to work its way through both the House and the Senate. It was passed by the House in the special session, but the Senate was only taking up issues that had been proposed by the governor. And so we're hopeful that the Senate's going to take this legislation up as well. And that deals with folks who are incompetent, but have only committed a misdemeanor, simple assault, theft, some type of vandalism, these types of misdemeanors. That's been a real problem. 20 years ago, our state legislature, in order to save funds from the state treasury, determined that if someone committed a felony, then the state would pay for someone to do a 30-day inpatient evaluation on whether they are competent, and if they are found incompetent, to do whatever training is necessary, whether it's educational, whether it's medical, whether it's any type of treatment, to help them become competent. And once they became competent, then they could become. Then the case would go back to the court, and we would handle the case appropriately. But what the legislature said, they were no longer going to fund that type of evaluation and training for folks who had only committed a misdemeanor, and leave it up to the local governments to pay for that evaluation and training.
Nashville would have to pay for the folks here in Nashville.
No local jurisdiction in the state funded that at the level of going to Middle Tennessee Mental Health and having a 30-day inpatient evaluation. What Nashville did is they said, well, we will send folks to Vanderbilt and let Vanderbilt determine whether or not the person is competent or whether they were incompetent. It impacts the quality of life for everybody else in Nashville, but even more importantly, those folks who need supports aren't getting any support, even though we've identified that they've got issues that could be addressed. They're going to need housing, they're going to need some type of training, they're going to need supports. Maybe if you get on your medication, maybe your brother will let you live with them again, or any of those types of things. So it really impacts all of these different groups in Nashville that we have not, and really no community in the state, once again, we've not properly addressed. And so what the second piece of legislation says that we'll go back to where we were 20 years ago, and the state will pay for a full evaluation, inpatient treatment for 30 days, report it back as far as whether they've gotten folks to be competent again or not. That also gives us time, if they're incompetent never to become competent, to provide the supports and the social workers and the types of housing that are going to be necessary, job training if we need to do that, to where they can be successful going forward. We took a census about 2 years ago and identified 229 people that have committed multiple misdemeanors and have continued to get rearrested, found to be incompetent, sent right back out on the streets with no supports, only to commit new crimes. And so those are the folks that we have failed, and those are the folks that are impacting the community with their frequent low-level crimes. They've impacted the court system by cluttering the dockets when we should be focused on other things. And the other problem is, if they continue to learn maybe not how the court system works, but learn that they're not going to be punished, then we run the risk that they could graduate to more serious crimes and potentially even violent crimes. And so if we can handle these folks when they're still committing misdemeanors in an appropriate way, then hopefully we end up with a safer Nashville.
Our conversation with Nashville District Attorney General Glenn Funk continues. When This Week continues, we'll be right back.